The jungle was still, but not dead. The air hung thick with smoke and salt, and the ground trembled faintly from what had come hours before, the naval shells that had turned the ridge into a scar of dirt and fire. Hawk motioned his men forward with 2 fingers, silent, his face streaked with ash. Tex's shotgun rested across his chest like a sleeping beast, its steel darkened with soot. Every breath was slow, measured. Even the oceans crashed beyond the hill seemed afraid to intrude. They were ghosts now, moving through a graveyard still waiting to be named. Eddie's radio crackled once, just enough to make him flinch, and Hawk's eyes cut him a warning sharper than a knife. No words. The only sound was the crunch of boots over shattered coral and bone. Ahead, the jungle broke open into a field pocked with black mouths, bunkers silent and smoking. The kind of silence that screams before the gunfire starts. The first bunker loomed out of the haze like a wound that refused to close. Hawk raised his hand again, signaling a slow advance. The air was thicker here, the smoke heavier with the scent of burned oil and blood. Tex moved to the left flank, crouched low, eyes flicking between the shadows in the jagged mouth of the opening. Eddie followed, every muscle locked tight, his radio antenna scraping faintly against the stone. Hawk's mind replayed the bombardment. He'd watched the shells fall, seen the explosions swallow this hill whole. No one could have lived through that, but as the squad edged closer, a faint metallic clatter rolled from inside, like a spent cartridge tapping stone. Hawk froze. His eyes met Tex across the smoke. No words, just that shared pulse of dread, the kind that lives in the silence between heartbeats. The bunker wasn't empty. It was listening. Tex moved first, crouching to peer into the darkness. The bunker's breath was hot and metallic, the kind of air that carried memory. He lifted his flashlight just enough to paint the interior in trembling white arcs, charred crates, a half-melted rifle. The shape of a helmet resting upright on the floor, too clean. Hawk moved behind him, his shotgun lowered but ready, and together they entered the threshold. The earth swallowed them whole. Inside, the silence thickened into something almost alive. Then a cough. Ragged. Human. Deep inside the black, Hawk froze mid-step. Tex turned slowly, flashlight shaking. There it was again, weaker this time, followed by a rasping breath. Someone was alive down there, breathing beneath the dead. Hawk felt his pulse climb, the war's rhythm returning. He nodded once. Tex chambered a shell. The sound echoed like thunder underground. The cough came again, closer now. Tex stepped forward, voice low but steady. "In there," he muttered, eyes narrowing as the beam caught movement, a hand dragging through dust. A Japanese Marine, barely breathing, eyes glazed with shock. Hawk lowered his weapon slightly, torn between instinct and duty. The man's lips moved soundlessly, maybe a prayer, maybe just the last breath leaving his body. Hawk's own chest tightened. For a moment, the bunker seemed to shrink around them, walls pressing inward with every heartbeat. Eddie's voice crackled softly over the radio behind them. Movement outside. 2, maybe 3. Hawk's decision snapped into place. "Tex, finish it." The shotgun thundered once, filling the bunker with smoke and silence. When it cleared, the man was still. Hawk looked at the body for half a second too long, then turned back toward daylight, his eyes unreadable. They emerged from the bunker into a silence that felt too deliberate. The air was thicker, heavier, as if the island itself was holding its breath. Hawk scanned the tree line, shadows shifting where there shouldn't be any. Eddie knelt by the bunker mouth, fiddling nervously with his radio, static whispering like distant voices. "Can't raise command," he muttered. Tex wiped his face with a sleeve, the smell of blood clinging to his skin. Then movement. A flash in the foliage. A single shot cracked, striking the dirt inches from Hawk's boot. "Contact!" Tex roared, firing into the trees as Hawk dropped to a knee. The jungle erupted. Rifle fire, smoke, shouts in Japanese echoing through the haze. The bunkers had been waiting. The enemy wasn't dead. They were breathing with the island, patient, silent, and ready. The gunfire above faded to a muffled hum as Hawk and his men crouched behind the broken bunker wall, hearts hammering in rhythm with the earth. The air reeked of cordite and decay. Tex reloaded by touch alone, sliding shells into the Winchester's breech with the smooth certainty of habit. Hawk's gaze followed a narrow shaft leading deeper underground. A tunnel mouth half buried in sandbags and roots. "They're under us," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. Eddie's radio hissed softly, the signal swallowed by the soil. "We go down," Hawk said, knowing there was no other way. The tunnels were where the fight still lived. He led first, ducking into the narrow passage, flashlight beam cutting a thin white wound through the black. The air inside was damp, pulsing with unseen life. Every sound, the drip of water, the rustle of cloth, felt close enough to breathe. The tunnel swallowed them whole, the world above shrinking into a faint echo. Hawk's flashlight revealed walls lined with rotting timber supports and the occasional marking. Japanese characters scrawled in chalk. The passage turned sharply, narrowing until the men had to crawl on their knees. Tex grunted. "Shotgun, dragging against stone. Feels like crawling into a grave," he muttered. Hawk didn't answer. He could feel the vibration of movement ahead. Footsteps, faint but deliberate. Eddie's breathing came fast, too loud in the confined dark. "Quiet," Hawk whispered. Then it came. A whisper in Japanese, followed by the sound of metal scraping against rock. Hawk froze, finger to his lips. A trickle of dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere ahead, someone struck a match. For a fraction of a second, the tunnel bloomed orange. And then, the light vanished. A sudden shout tore through the silence, followed by the roar of a grenade detonation ahead. The blast slammed the men against the walls, filling the tunnel with choking dust. Hawk coughed, ears ringing, flashlight sputtering in his grasp. Tex pushed himself up, ears bleeding slightly, and shouted something that was lost in the noise. Through the haze, shadowed figures emerged. Japanese Marines, desperate, wounded, but still fighting. The firefight turned into chaos. Muzzle flashes, lighting the narrow space like lightning. Hawk fired in bursts, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. Tex's shotgun barked thunder, shredding through darkness. Eddie screamed for cover, clutching his radio as fragments rained from the ceiling. For every shot fired, the tunnel gave a deeper groan, as though the island itself resented their presence. The firefight died as quickly as it began. Hawk blinked through the haze, coughing up dust and dirt. The air stung with the sourness of gunpowder and fear. One of the Japanese soldiers still moved, crawling toward a shattered helmet, whispering something broken and trembling. Hawk lowered his weapon, watching him. The man wasn't fighting anymore, just dying in the dark. Tex's breathing slowed, his hands shaking as he reloaded. "They ain't stopping," he muttered. Hawk said nothing, staring into the tunnel's black mouth ahead. There was still another passage branching right, faint air flowing from it. Fresh, alive. "We keep going," he said quietly. Eddie looked like he wanted to protest, but one look from Hawk silenced him. The dead had done their part. The living had further to fall. The deeper tunnel widened into a chamber supported by thick wooden beams. Crates, supplies, even food cans. An entire outpost buried beneath the hill. Hawk scanned the space, flashlight sweeping across faded photos pinned to the wall. Families' letters, a child's drawing of a sunrise. The sight hit harder than shrapnel. Tex lowered his weapon, expression softening. "They live down here," he whispered. Hawk nodded slowly, a grim respect in his eyes. Then his beam froze on something, wires snaking along the floor toward a cluster of drums marked with Japanese script. His stomach turned cold. "Back out," he ordered sharply. "Now," Eddie stumbled, radio clattering. Before Tex could ask why, the faint hiss of a fuse reached their ears. The chamber lit orange, the sound swelling like a heartbeat before the world erupted. The explosion hit like the breath of the earth itself. Fire, dust, and stone tore through the tunnel, swallowing sound and light in one crushing wave. Hawk felt the air leave his lungs as he was thrown backward, the world reduced to ringing and pain. When he came to, everything was black, except for the faint glow of Tech's flashlight lying on the floor, flickering weakly. "Eddie!" Hawk rasped, crawling through rubble. A cough answered. Small, terrified. Eddie was pinned beneath a beam, blood streaking his temple. Tex limped over, coughing hard, his shotgun miraculously intact. "Tunnels caved," he said through clenched teeth. Hawk looked up at the twisted beams. No way back, no light, only the deep, suffocating dark. Somewhere beyond the debris, a faint voice whispered in Japanese, calm, deliberate, like a man reciting a prayer. They dug Eddie free, hands raw and shaking. The boy groaned, whispering that he could still move, but Hawk saw the color draining from his face. "You're fine, kid." Hawk lied, tightening a bandage around his leg. Tex knelt nearby, listening. The sound came again. Footsteps in the debris, careful, methodical. Hawk raised his finger for silence. The air pressed in, heavy with burnt metal and sweat. Tex cocked the shotgun, the metallic click echoing like thunder in the tomb. Then the first shadow appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Helmet low, rifle steady. Hawk fired first, the flash painting the darkness white for a heartbeat. Tex followed, his shotgun roaring, the sound ricocheting off the walls until it became a physical thing. The tunnel filled with smoke and screams. The Americans couldn't see. Neither could the enemy. Only the sound decided who lived. When the gunfire stopped, the world was a whisper again. Just the hiss of settling dust and the ringing in their ears. Hawk blinked through the haze, rifle trembling slightly. Tex sat against the wall, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. "You see that?" he muttered, voice hoarse. Hawk didn't answer. He could still hear something, a slow, dragging sound deeper in the dark, a wounded man or one waiting to die. Hawk stood, flashlight shaking in his hand. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, bare feet stepping through the dust, a Japanese officer, sword in hand, eyes gleaming with fatal calm. Hawk froze, respect and dread intertwining. The man bowed slightly, almost ceremonially, before raising the blade. Tex lifted the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The blast swallowed the gesture whole. The echo lingered, heavy as prayer. Eddie whimpered softly, clutching his wounded leg. Hawk knelt beside him, the adrenaline slowly leaking out of his veins. "Stay with me," he whispered. Tex reloaded quietly, face unreadable. The flashlight dimmed further, its beam fading to a dying glow. Hawk looked around. The walls seemed closer now, breathing with every flicker of light. "We can't stay," he said. "Air's going bad." Tex nodded, slinging Eddie's arm over his shoulder. They moved slowly down the only remaining passage, deeper still. The sound of dripping water echoed ahead. Hawk's thoughts drifted to the world above. Sunlight, wind, the sound of waves. It felt like memory from another life. Behind them, something cracked. A single board gave way, followed by a low, rumbling groan that made the earth tremble. They stumbled into another chamber, a burial of air and silence. The room was lined with sleeping mats, ration tins, a fallen flag half buried in dirt. Tex set Eddie down carefully. Hawk walked to the center, finding a small shrine. Incense sticks burnt to ash, a photo of a family smiling beside a child in uniform. He stared at it for a long time. "They died believing they'd never leave this place," he murmured. Tex sat beside him, shotgun resting across his knees. "We might not either," he said quietly. The two men shared a look that needed no words, one of exhaustion, guilt, and grim understanding. Then, somewhere deep in the tunnel, a voice called out again. Japanese. Calm. Commanding. Hawk tightened his grip on the rifle, and the darkness answered back with another echoing shot. The silence beneath the ridge was no longer peaceful. It pulsed with pain. Corporal Hiroshi Sato sat in the dim glow of a lantern, listening to the faint tremors above, the muffled roar of explosions, and the dull thud of footsteps. His officer, Lieutenant Masaru Ito, knelt before a tattered map spread over an ammunition crate. His hands steady, movements deliberate. "They are in the tunnels," Ito said, voice calm but drained. Sato swallowed hard, gripping his rifle tighter. Around them 3 wounded men lay in silence, bandaged in shadows, their breath shallow. "We should fall back to the lower chamber," Sato offered quietly. Ito shook his head. "We hold. This ground is our emperor's heart." The words were steady, but Sato saw it, the flicker of doubt behind Ito's stoic eyes. The kind that meant he already knew they were ghosts waiting for light that would never return. Sato moved through the adjoining corridor, lantern in hand, the flame trembling as if afraid of the air. The walls were lined with carved niches where weapons and supplies once lay, now mostly empty. He stopped at one corner and knelt, touching the earth. Fresh prints. Heavy boots. Americans. He felt his pulse rise. He turned back, whispering to a private standing guard. "They're close. 2 tunnels away." The private nodded but didn't speak. His mouth was dry, his eyes hollow. From the command post, Ito's voice drifted softly, almost like prayer. "If they come, we fight until we become the dust." Sato looked at the boy beside him and realized neither of them wanted to die in the dark, yet honor left no room for wanting. He adjusted his bayonet and faced the tunnel's mouth, waiting for the sound of foreign breath. The first sound was faint, metal against stone, the echo of movement. Sato raised his hand, signaling silence. The Americans were close now. His heart pounded in slow, deliberate beats. He could smell them. Gunpowder, sweat, blood. He aimed down the corridor, waiting for the inevitable burst of light. A flash erupted. Gunfire, cutting through the dark. The fight was chaos. Sato fired twice, then rolled behind a support beam as dust and smoke exploded around him. His comrade screamed, cut off by another blast. The air filled with debris, every sound magnified in the confined space. Sato crawled to the fallen man, but there was nothing left to save. He looked up and saw the flashlight beam approaching, the Americans advancing like ghosts through smoke. Sato's breath slowed. He whispered a name. His son's. And waited for the next shot. When the gunfire stopped, Sato's ears rang with the sound of his own breathing. He leaned against the wall, rifle empty, hands shaking. A faint light flickered on the opposite side, an American lantern. He could see them now, shapes moving slowly through the smoke. One of them called out softly in English, words he didn't understand, but tone he recognized. Compassion, maybe mercy. Sato hesitated. He thought of Ito, of the Emperor, of the stories he'd been told about honor and surrender. Then a voice echoed behind him. Ito's, calm but sharp. "Do not bow to death. Command it." Sato swallowed hard, chambered one final round, and rose to his feet. The Americans saw the motion and fired. The sound was final, sharp and clean. Sato's body folded to the ground like paper. His rifle clattered beside him, echoing down the tunnel long after breath was gone. Lieutenant Ito sat alone in the command room, his men gone, the lantern's flame shrinking to a whisper. The air smelled of ash and salt, drifting faintly from cracks above. He unbuttoned his tunic, revealing the worn cloth of a rising sun flag folded over his chest. Slowly, he laid it on the table, smoothing its creases with bloodied hands. Outside, he heard voices, foreign, cautious, drawing closer. Ito took a final breath, steady as prayer, and lifted his sidearm. He closed his eyes, whispered a name, Hiroshi, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed softly through the tunnels, like a sigh the earth had been holding too long. Above ground, Hawk paused mid-step, head turning toward the sound. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he whispered, "It's over." But in his voice, there was no victory, only weight. The tunnels were dying. Every breath drew dust, every sound carried collapse. Hawk led the way through choking smoke, one hand on the wall to feel the earth's heartbeat. Behind him, Tex half carried Eddie, whose leg was wrapped in bloody bandages now dark with grime. "Keep moving," Hawk said, his voice rasping through the haze. Above, muffled detonations rolled through the ground like thunder. The air was thick with heat. The island itself seemed to burn from the inside out. "Ain't no way this place holds much longer," Tex muttered. Hawk didn't answer. He could see it in Tex's eyes. Exhaustion? Fear. The quiet understanding that none of them were meant to leave this buried hell. Then, through the flickering light of the last flashlight, they saw it. A thin shaft of daylight cutting down from a cracked ceiling beam. Hope, small and trembling, bleeding through the smoke. They crawled toward the light, pushing debris aside with trembling hands. Hawk lifted his rifle, wedging it under a beam to pry open a path. The wood moaned, cracking under pressure. Dust filled his lungs. Every breath burned. Eddie coughed blood but kept moving, whispering a prayer between gasps. Tex muttered, come on," as if talking to the earth itself. Finally, the beam gave way, and a torrent of sunlight spilled through, blinding after hours of dark. Hawk blinked, almost forgetting what color was. He pulled himself up into the gap, the surface close enough to touch. But just as he reached for it, a deep rumble shook the ground. The tunnel behind them began to collapse, screaming through stone and flame. Hawk turned, grabbed Eddie's arm, and shouted, "Move!" as the world fell inward. They burst through the breach into a scorched trench, gasping at the sudden weight of air and sky. The sun glared cruelly, a burning eye over a wasteland of ash. Hawk dragged Eddie out, laying him on the dirt. Tex stumbled behind, coughing hard, eyes watering from smoke and sunlight. For a moment, none of them spoke. Just the distant crash of waves and the hiss of fire consuming the jungle. Then Eddie whispered, "We made it." Hawk looked at him, pale, shaking, barely alive, and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly, but his gaze drifted toward the smoke curling from the collapsed ridge. He knew what was buried under there. Men who'd fought, prayed, and died in the same dirt. The enemy and his own alike. The island had taken them all, only choosing who to spit back. The radio crackled, a ghost of sound through static. Eddie fumbled with the dial, his hands trembling. "Command, this is Charlie Team," he wheezed. Nothing but hissing air answered. Hawk took the receiver, pressed it to his ear, and heard a distant voice. "Report. Survivors?" He stared at the smoking ridge, then at his men. "3 left," he said. Silence. Then a broken reply. "Evac point. Beach. Sunrise." Hawk dropped the radio gently. "We move at first light," Tex nodded. staring into the dying firelight. The silence between them was heavier than words. Eddie leaned back, eyes closing as the sky deepened to amber. For the first time in hours, Hawk allowed himself to breathe, but the air still carried the smell of the dead. A reminder that even survival came at a price too heavy to name. Night came slow, wrapping the island in smoke and whispers. Hawk sat awake, watching the horizon where the sea met firelight. Tex slept beside Eddie, head bowed, shotgun within reach, even in dreams. Hawk thought of the men buried below. Of Ito Sato, the voices that had fought and fallen unseen. He wondered if they'd all believed the same lie, that the war could be survived. A gust of wind carried a faint sound from the ridge, metal shifting, stone cracking. Hawk stared toward it, heart heavy, as if the earth itself was still remembering. "Rest easy," he murmured, unsure whom he spoke to. The stars blinked faintly through the haze, their light struggling through the smoke. For the first time since the landing, Hawk felt something close to mercy. Small, fragile, and fading with the dawn. Dawn bled over the ridge like a wound reopening. The smoke had thinned through the night, leaving the air heavy with ash and salt. Hawk sat alone at the trench's edge, watching light spill over the shattered jungle. The silence was alive, filled with things unsaid, ghosts unseen. Tex stirred awake, rubbing grit from his eyes. "Sun's up," he muttered. Hawk nodded, his face pale in the morning light. "Grab your gear, we head for the beach." Eddie groaned as Tex helped him stand, his leg trembling but holding. The three men looked like remnants, uniforms torn, eyes hollow, movements slow. The world around them was both beautiful and ruined, golden light touching corpses half buried in soot. As they began their descent, Hawk glanced back once at the ridge. The bunker mouths gaped silently in the earth, smoke rising like breath from the dead. He whispered, "Rest now," and kept walking. The path to the beach wound through a graveyard of steel and silence. Rusted helmets, shattered rifles, and nameless bodies marked the trail. Tex kicked at a shell casing, sending it spinning across the dirt. "Feels like walking through memory," he said quietly. Hawk didn't answer. His mind wandered to faces the men had lost, the ones had killed, the ones had never known. Eddie's breathing grew labored, every step an effort. Hawk slowed his pace, taking some of his weight without a word. The sound of waves reached them faintly, like an old song carried through time. "You hear that?" Eddie whispered. Hawk nodded. "Ocean." For the first time since the battle began, it didn't sound like war. It sounded like home, distant, unreachable, and cruelly beautiful. They reached a clearing where palm stumps jutted like broken bones. Hawk stopped, motioning for silence. He could hear voices ahead. American, faint, calling through the haze. Tex exhaled in relief. "Rescue team," he said. But Hawk didn't move right away. He scanned the tree line, eyes narrowing. The jungle had learned to deceive. After a moment, he nodded. "Let's go." They stepped forward slowly, weapons half raised. Figures emerged through the mist. Marines, faces smeared with dirt, disbelief on their features. "Holy hell," one said. "We thought nobody made it out." Hawk just stared. Tex gave a weary grin. "Guess we're too mean to die." The rescuers guided them toward the beach, their voices muffled by wind and the distant sound of gulls. For the first time, the war felt far away, though it still clung to their skin like smoke. By midday, they reached the shore. The sea stretched endless, reflecting sunlight like molten glass. Naval ships floated far beyond the horizon, silent witnesses to what remained. Hawk sat in the sand, boots half buried, eyes fixed on the waves. Tex handed him a canteen. "You think they'll remember this place?" Hawk didn't look up. "The island will." Eddie lay back, the surf brushing his boots, eyes half closed. "I dreamed about the ocean," he murmured. but it never looked like this. Tex glanced down at him, unsure what to say. Hawk finally turned his gaze seaward. "War's the same everywhere," he said softly. "It just leaves different ghosts behind." The wind rose, carrying the salt and smoke together until they were one. The sun began to fall again, painting the water blood red. A landing craft drifted toward shore, engines growling softly. Hawk stood, steadying Eddie as Tex helped him aboard. The sailors greeted them in silence, eyes wide at what the three survivors had become. Hawk turned for one last look at the island. Smoke still curled from the ridge, twisting upward like the memory of voices. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement among the ruins. Figures, distant and fading, watching them leave. He blinked, and they were gone. The boat pushed off, cutting across the crimson surf. Tex leaned against the railing, silent for once. Eddie slept, head resting on his pack. Hawk looked down at his hands. Trembling, scarred, human. The sea was calm again, but the sound beneath it was not silence. It was remembrance. Decades later, the island no longer looked like a battlefield. The jungle had reclaimed everything. Roots wrapping over steel, flowers blooming where fire once raged. The sea whispered against new sands, and the ridge stood silent under a clear sky. A team of local workers cleared brush near an old crater, laughing under the tropical sun. One of them struck metal with his shovel. The sound rang different. Deep, hollow, ancient. He knelt, brushing soil away until the outline appeared. A rusted helmet, half crushed, the insignia long erased by salt. Beneath it, something gleamed. A dog tag. The man turned it over in his hand, reading the faint letters. D.D. Reynolds. He didn't know the name, but something in the air shifted when he said it aloud. The wind rose, carrying the faint scent of smoke, as if the island still remembered. That evening, the tag sat on a desk inside a small coastal museum, surrounded by relics of forgotten wars. Tourists moved past it without much notice. Just another piece of metal from another story. But the curator lingered. She studied the faint engravings under a lamp, tracing the letters with her thumb. "Private collection recovery. Western Ridge," she murmured into her recorder. Outside, waves rolled softly against the shore. Somewhere beyond the glass, the jungle whispered in a language only time understood. When she looked closer, she saw something strange. Tiny flecks of blackened earth still clinging to the metal, as if it refused to let go of the place it came from. She smiled sadly, then placed it in a display marked simply, "Unknown Marine, Pacific Theater, 1944. The next morning, a storm gathered off the coast. Rain swept across the island, washing the soil from old scars. Beneath a tangle of roots near the ridge, the rain exposed what time had hidden. Wooden beams from the collapsed bunker, bits of fabric, fragments of bone. The jungle did not protest. It simply revealed, quietly, patiently. Down near the beach, a boy played in the surf, collecting driftwood and shells. One of the pieces wasn't wood at all. It was metal, shaped like the end of a rifle barrel, rusted but unmistakable. He carried it home, proud of his find, unaware of the story it held. The island gave and took without judgment. Its secrets never buried forever, only waiting for new hands to find them. That night, lightning flickered across the horizon, casting brief light over the ridge. For a heartbeat, the shapes seemed to move. Silhouettes of men standing guard where the bunkers once breathed. In the museum, the dog tag caught a flash of the same lightning, glinting as if alive. The curator woke from her chair, startled, and glanced toward the display. For a moment she thought she heard voices, the faint rhythm of boots in wet sand, the whisper of words carried by the sea. She approached the glass, breath fogging its surface. The sound faded. Only rain. Only time. She smiled faintly, whispering a phrase she didn't fully understand. "Rest now." The storm rolled on, but somewhere in the distance, the island seemed to sigh in relief. Morning returned calm and clear, the sea shining with impossible stillness. Children played near the shore where the landing craft had once burned. Above them, birds circled lazily, their cries sharp and bright against the endless blue. In the museum, the dog tag rested beneath glass, silent and unremarkable to most who passed. Yet when sunlight touched it just right, it shimmered faintly, gold where there should be rust. Out on the water, the tide pulled back, revealing the faint outline of old foundations buried in the sand. The earth had kept its secrets, but not forever. The island had learned to speak softly now. Its voice carried through waves, wind, and silence. And somewhere deep beneath its soil, where tunnels once breathed war, the air was finally still.